My story is called A Home on the Field. It's also the title of my book. And my story begins in 1998 in Washington, D.C. I'm a journalist, I'm an investigative reporter, and I'm working for a news organization. And I'm researching a book on Congress and special interest money. And I'm working on a chapter on worker safety issues, specifically in the meatpacking and poultry processing industries. And one of the things that I'm finding is that the industry is recruiting workers along the border. And in some cases, they were transporting them to small little rural towns in the Southeast and in the Midwest. And I thought that was a great story. I thought that was a story that I wanted to write about, and a story with impact, not only at that time, but also going on into the future. Because I figured that these communities would begin to change, and change forever. And I thought that in addition to those communities, those states would begin to change. And from there, the country would begin to change as well. But unfortunately, at that time, in 1998, I couldn't convince a single editor to invest in a story on immigration. Nobody cared about that issue. Today, it's perhaps one of the most important issues facing our country. I ended up getting a fellowship and moving to a small little rural town in North Carolina called Siler City, about maybe 35, 40 miles away from here. 3 chicken processing plants, a feed mill, a hatchery, and thousands of poultry workers, mostly from Mexico and Central America, had moved to this tiny little town. And I had never lived in a rural community before. I'd lived in Los Angeles and Chicago and Washington, and I have to confess to you that I was just bored out of my mind in a small little town like Siler City. And I began to coach a soccer team there, and I met these wonderful boys who were desperate to create a team at their local high school, Jordan Matthews High School. But each and every time that they had gone to the administration to create the team, they'd been told no. And what they didn't understand was that Siler City was a football town, not a football town. My story, my book, is about immigration and changing demographics. There are 2 demographic trends today. One is called the Grain of America, and this is the giant baby boom population that invented rock and roll, that dropped out and then sold out in the 80s and took over Wall Street and is the dominant population today. And that population is aging out and leaving us. At the same time, there's another demographic trend, and that's called the browning of America. Our country is getting more diverse and getting different. And both these trends are at play, perhaps in everything that we're thinking about and talking about in the country today. And these were the trends that I was seeing in these small rural communities, in these poultry processing towns like Siler City. This is the growth of the Latinx or Latino community over the past 10 years. And you can see that most of that growth has happened here in the Southeast. And this is directly because of the food processing industry and its recruiting practices. This is an industry that went out and sought cheap labor. A lot of people today like to talk about this issue in terms of, this is the changing demographics, this is an invasion. Not so at all. This was an invitation by big business to bring people in to work cheaply. And you can see this change over the past 20 years here in North Carolina, and you can see both these demographic trends in the green wedges and in the yellow wedges that we see here. The Latino population in North Carolina has grown, and today it's about 8.4%, and that's true in the United States as well, where it's about 17% of the population and on its way to maybe being a quarter. Siler City itself has changed. From a town of 8,000 people, a population in 1990 of maybe less than 2% today is at almost 50%, if not more. This is the majority community in Siler City, and it's happened in the last 20-some years. And you can see the trend here in terms of the generations. This is a community that has gotten younger. This is a trend that you don't see in the United States. Our communities get older, they don't get younger. But in a town like Siler City, It cuts against the grain. It's a community that is getting younger. And this is because when you break it down by race and ethnicity, and you look at the median age, you look at whites who are not Latino coming in at around 56 years old, and African Americans at 43. Meanwhile, the Latinos are at 23 years old. That's an incredibly young population. At 56, I can guarantee you nobody wants to have another child. At 43, maybe, doubtful, but at 23, that's a community that is in its prime childbearing years and will be the future for Siler City and for that county, and will be the future as well for our state and our country. It has not been an easy time for Siler City. It has gone through what I call like the 5 stages of dealing with demographic change. It's been depressed at times, and I've heard that from people. It's tried to bargain. The longtime residents have said things like, you know, when the poultry industry goes, these people will leave as well, and we'll get our town back. And it's also been through an angry stage. And in the year 2000, when I was there, it held this anti-immigrant rally, which featured David Duke. And David Duke got up there and talked for 2 hours about the industry, bringing in these workers, and how they needed to be rounded up and sent back home and deported. It sounds a lot like what's going on today. Back to the team. I did something that most journalists don't do. I got involved. And I took up their cause to push forward this team and to get it created at Jordan Matthews High School. And after a good deal of effort, we were able to successfully get the team together. Our first season, we went 14-2. Our second season, we went 16-2. And I knew that this team had great potential to go on and do better things. And for the boys on this team, the boys who had felt alienated, who never really felt connected to their school, for them to don these uniforms and to wear these colors, this was their first opportunity to feel as if they belonged to their community, as if they had a home. That field represented that to them. I want you to take a look at the center character in this picture in the yellow jersey. This is a kid named Fish. When Fish first came to the United States at 11 years old, he was brought here by his family, who worked in the poultry industry. He arrived on his first day at school, not speaking a word of English. His teacher asked him what his favorite food was, and the only word he knew was fish. And all the other kids made fun of him, and they laughed at him, and that became his nickname. And to this day, that's what he's called. That's what he's known as Fish. And Fish became a great goalkeeper. He played all over. He played in the streets. He played in La Ligas. He played anywhere that he could, and he expanded his skills, and he became an expert goalkeeper. In his junior year in high school, he came to me, and he said, "Cuadros, I've got a problem." And I said, "Okay, what's up?" And he told me that he needed to go back to Mexico because his grandmother was dying. And he told me a story about when he'd left Mexico, when he left Veracruz, that he didn't have the courage at 7 years old to say goodbye to her. And he wanted to get that chance back. And this was his opportunity. Now, I'd been coaching the team now for 2 years, and I was worried because we were just about to go into a third season, and with a player like Fish, we had tremendous chances of going on even further in the state tournament. And so I knew that this was going to be a huge loss to the team. And I said, well, if you have to go, then go. And I really thought in my mind that I would never see Fish again. I really thought that. And so Fish left, and he returned back to Mexico. And after spending a month or 2 months over the summertime being with his grandmother and getting that opportunity to say goodbye to her, he wanted to come back. He had left behind his girlfriend, he had left behind his friends, he had left behind his school, and he left behind his team and the field that he played on. And he wanted to go home because Siler City had become home for him. He wanted to come home. And so he did something that many people have done, he crossed the border. He spent 5 days in the desert, took about 3 gallons of water with him, a lot of cans of tuna and tortillas, and crossed that desert by himself in a group of people. And his crossing was tough. He saw many things that kids should not see. And one of the things that I've realized in coaching the Jets is that all the kids have been touched by the desert in some way. It leaves its mark on them, and it has. When I've coached the team, they're more mature. They're more purposeful. They are not like other kids. They have seen things that other kids have not seen and been through things that other kids have not been through. He spent 5 days in the desert until he made it back to a safe house. And at that safe house, he was able to use the telephone, and he called his brother in Siler City, and he asked him some questions. How's his girlfriend? And then he asked him, how's the team doing? Are the tryouts going on? What's going on with the team? And then he spent the next 2 or 3 days traveling from the border through the United States to North Carolina. And one day, I think it was the last day of eligibility that we could actually sign up players to play that fall, I was in the athletic director's office, my athletic director, and he asked me how the team was looking this year. And I said to him, Coach, well, we could be doing a lot better if our goalkeeper were back. And he said, well, wait a second. He's here. He got here today. And I said, you're kidding. We got a game tonight. So I rushed over to Fish's house, and I saw him, and I could see the signs of the desert on him. He was thinner. He had been dehydrated, and he had been through an ordeal. You could tell physically that he was not himself. And I kind of dusted him off, and I said, hey, Fish, it's great to see you back. We got a game tonight. Do you want to play? And he said, yes, Cuadros, I want to play. And I said, well, we got to get you a physical. So I drove him over to the nearest doctor that I knew, and it was already after hours. And I remember pounding on the door until the doctor came out, and I said, Doctor, we need this kid to get a physical right now because he wants to play tonight. And he took one look at Fish, looked him up and down, and said, okay, Coach, I'll sign those forms. And so he passed his physical, and after that, I took him over to Jordan Matthews High School, and we arrived there, and he's changing in my car, and he looks out across the school and the field looks beautiful. The field is green and immaculate, and the big lights are on, and he says to me, Cuadros, this is beautiful. And I said, you're right, it is. The next season, Fish led us to a state championship, the first all-Latino team to win a state championship in North Carolina, perhaps in the South. And the story of the Jets is really the story of America in so many different ways. The desire to achieve, the desire to make your new country your home, all those themes are wrapped up in these boys and their desire to be champions. In Siler City, they had been seen as strangers, as troublemakers, as kids who maybe get into trouble. But winning the state championship redefined who they were. They went from being strangers to being rooted for, even by the longtime residents who attended that David Duke rally. They had changed people's minds about who they were. A Home on the Field is about immigration, but it's really about changing demographics. And this is something I've been ruminating on lately. The issue of immigration, which today we now know is a huge issue, perhaps one of the biggest stories facing our country today, is really about how our country is changing, how our homes are changing, how our home is changing, and the new people that are in it. And the idea whether or not we can accept newcomers and new people. And I think a lot of the issues that we face today are directly related to this idea of change and how that change is impacting us. One of the big lessons I've learned from coaching the Jets for 16 years now, because I'm still coaching them, is the idea that we have to learn to share resources. This is a big sticking point with the football guys. They didn't want to share that field. And when you've been in the majority, when you've owned everything, and the whole culture revolves around you, sharing really means giving something up. And so they were reluctant to do that. But when they did, great things happened. We were able to be successful on that field. We were able to win a state championship from playing on that field. And we were able to change and integrate into the society itself. A home can be anything. For these boys, and for many of the boys that I've coached, it's that field, it's that ball, it's that little piece of home that they brought with them here that they've allowed to be able to integrate in our society in their own way. I want to thank you for letting me speak to you today and sharing my story. Thank you very much.